right, welcome back to this week's Goat Rodeo Podcast. I'm your host, Garrett Smith, joined by regular co-hosts Simon Kuhn and Dave Cottle. All of us are at Reveal Technology, and we have things to say varying between hyper-intelligent and less intelligent on the spectrum of geopolitics to defense, technology, renaissance, startup, venture capital, and everything in between. Thanks for joining us this week. I'm wearing, I know that we're always commenting on shirts and stuff, but I want to hear about Harm's Way, Simon. But first, I'm just gonna say I'm wearing a Dead & Company shirt from their recent stint at the Sphere in Las Vegas, and I just want to say a couple things. If you haven't been to a show in the Sphere and you've heard about the Sphere and you hear that it's incredible or whatever, or you've heard that it's not that great, it was awesome. I don't know that I can overstate how really great that show was, and the use of that facility. It's pretty incredible. I mean, it's very different. I still prefer the Grateful Dead or Dead & Company in like a big outdoor venue where it's like, it feels kind of like the 1960s. But if you can't get that, the Sphere is pretty freaking awesome. And we saw a couple of shows there when we were down in Vegas, and it was awesome. Have either of you guys been to a show in the Sphere? Has Harm's Way played in the Sphere? Is Harm's Way a band? I don't even know what you're wearing.
Yeah, so I'm gonna run through this the speed run style. One, why are you wearing two t-shirts at the same time? Two, the top two worst possible places that I would want to see a show in order are massive technodrome and outdoor auditorium venue amphitheater thing.
I know you're into the illegal warehouse scene.
Yeah, and then finally, I've seen Harm's Way play illegal warehouses half a dozen times, and they've only recently started playing real venues. And I prefer all of my shows to be 150 people or less at best.
As usual, Simon and I are on polar opposite ends of the spectrum.
I do like John Mayer a lot. Is he still playing with the Dead & Company?
So again, we don't need to go down this rabbit hole. We should get into the content because there's a lot of ground to cover today. But John Mayer, not only does he play with Dead & Company, he owns 51% of the thing. And
so financially and musically carries it, because that's right. Men are fucking tired.
Yeah. Well, it's not all old men. Like Mickey and Bobby still play, and they're in their 80s. Like, they are legitimately old people. But O'Teal's on the bass, and he's a young guy. John's a young guy. I mean, they're gradually taking over Dead & Company and that IP and that thing with younger people. And but John rips, dude. I couldn't believe it. He's probably one of the best guitarists of our generation. Awesome.
I want to put one last note. There could not be a more polar opposite band to Dead & Company than Harm's Way, but I highly recommend just giving them a Google and getting a look at the like 260-pound lead singer of Harm's Way.
Producer Ian is going to drop a Harm's Way link in the show notes.
Just a monster human.
Dave, I'm just assuming you don't want to wade into this cesspool of conversation, and that's fine. We'll just pivot straight into the content. So let's cover a couple of big news items from our space in the week. And again, we range between geopolitics and venture and defense tech and all that stuff. So we're going to start with geopolitics. The big news is that Israel executed what on the surface appears to be a unilateral set of military actions targeting the Iranian regime, the Iranian military, and the Iranian nuclear capabilities on the tail end of what also appears to be a failed negotiation process. Now, there's a lot of information bouncing around all over the place, some of it misinformation, disinformation, whatever those terms mean, some of it right, some of it wrong. There's a lot of narrative and political spin on this thing. Was the U.S. involved? Is Trump playing 4D chess, or is he getting coerced by Prime Minister Netanyahu at some level? What's going on? But suffice to say, the Israeli military and intelligence and security services are cleaning house. They have essentially free reign to fly over much of the country, and certainly the capital city in Iran, in Tehran. And it appears to me that, like, we're watching history unfold, and this is probably the beginning of the end. This is my estimation. Time now. I think 60% chance this is the beginning of the end of the Iranian Islamic Republic and the regime. And I hope that it leads to greater peace, but we're likely in for a period of conflict. What were you guys' reflections over the weekend and into this week as that thing was unfolding?
First on the list is that, much like the attack in Russia, that the star of the show for the opening attack was tradecraft. Like, there's tech enabling this stuff, But the amazing thing to me is not that they had quadcopters, which anyone could buy off the shelf. The amazing thing to me is that there were allegedly Mossad folks in Iran right next to their air defense sites,
Right.
ready to sabotage and take down that defense system immediately when things turned hot. My second big takeaway, and I advise everyone to the extent that you follow it to keep an ear open for it, is the rumblings that I've seen out of Russian military groups about how does Israel have air dominance so fast, and we've spent years trying to establish something similar and can't do any of this. Completely incapable. We can't target the sites of the government. We can't target the leadership sites for the military. We can't stop Ukrainian TV. We can't affect really anything that happens in Ukraine. Yet Israel is able to like vice grip paralyze all of Iran.
Don't you think?
In a few hours.
Don't you think at some level it's willingness to exert influence and power? Like the United States and the West maybe could be more strong in their intervention in Ukraine. They could, but they don't want to for whatever geopolitical reasons. Yeah, that could be domestic politics. It could be war weariness. It could be all kinds of different things.
Oh, I mean, the perspective I was actually saying is that the Russians, I think, are going to be very frustrated with their own government's inability to have the same success that Israel's having.
Oh, sure.
Right. Like the speed with which Israel has penetrated and rolled up air defense is something that Russia was unable to replicate for years.
Yeah, I mean,
modern Russian warfare looks like conscripting North Koreans, and
Right.
modern Israeli warfare looks like blowing up with impunity anything you want on the ground across
the
an entire
the
enemy state.
tradecraft angle here is, I think, extremely relevant. Like not only the items that you mentioned, Simon, but like they knew exactly where the 10 to 15 top generals and their deputies, the number twos, and the whole range of Iranian nuclear scientists were on the night of the attack and had precision targeting, going on.
Did you see the Iranian commercial that Israel started rerunning? So the Iranians basically cut a promo.
I don't watch Iranian propaganda TV.
It's Israeli propaganda.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Israel was running this. So the Iranians made a propaganda video with their generals riding around these little mini carts in their underground facilities with all these missiles, all these things. And the Israelis just reran it and added deceased next to the names of everyone in the video.
So good. Wow.
And like that's it. They just ran the video back. Like everyone that cut this propaganda piece last month is now dead.
That is savage.
My only reflections on this were like the regime's got to be in a really tight spot. I mean, obviously, like not just they're up against Israel,
right.
Like the eagle is sharpening its claws, right? There's always the threat of B2s looming over this situation.
That's
and
right.
I don't think that like a lot more about this situation in this part of the world, Garrett, but like I don't think that the Iranian regime particularly has much popular support. Right. It's not like that people are going to rally around this mission and like, no, we really need to be a nuclear power.
Yeah. So from what I understand, and again, I'm not an expert per se. I've looked at this problem a lot over the last 15, 20 years and did some of it at in grad school, but it's a little bit dusty. But something like 18 to 22% is the estimated range of popular support for the regime, which if that was in America, like they'd be voted out during the midterms, right? I mean, that. Yeah. But that's not how it works over there. It's an ideological theocratic dictatorship with some elements of military junta, right? So like it's an so here's one of the other reasons I think they are very vulnerable. And so I was scratching my head. I was like, hey, after the Israelis knocked out all their air defenses last year in one of a combination of the April and October attacks, they knocked out a huge range of the Iranian air defense systems. Why didn't they replace those? So it made me think, okay, what other countries in addition to Iran are reliant on Russian anti-aircraft technologies? Well, Russia, right? So like, is this a paper tiger scenario? In other words, are we looking at an autocratic kind of set of countries that are actually far more vulnerable to Western air dominance than otherwise? So this is an evolving situation. I think the big question now is like whether and to what extent the U.S. gets involved. It's clear that if the West really wants to handle and put an end to the nuclear programs in Iran, it's probably a combination of B-2 bombers with bunker busters that only the United States has. So, OSINT folks monitor, air traffic in and out of Diego Garcia. And and diplomatic pressure. So, hopefully the result here is peace.
I want to add one little thing to this, which is if you think about recent conflicts, and I mean last 6 months, the only place where this sort of axis of the world seems to have been somewhat successful are the Pakistanis, who are using Chinese gear as opposed to Russian gear, right?
Sure.
If you look at their conflict with the Indians, otherwise you're right.
That's right.
Pretty much anyone using Russian equipment has been on the losing side of the equation, and Pakistan, who has expressed direct support for Iran, seems to be the the anomaly.
It is interesting also, and maybe we can, after this comment, we'll hand the mic off to Dave, who's taking the next segment, but the international community is not really coming to Iran's aid here, right? The typical, supporters of the Iranian regime, that's Russia, potentially the other folks in this kind of axis of resistance or whatever, China and others. I think that's telling, and I think they're on the ropes, and we'll see. I think it's going to unfold quickly, as we saw in Syria. One day the Assad regime was gone, right? It happens so fast, and we'll see. I think that's potentially what's on the table here.
Yeah, so I fundamentally agree with you. I think it's an interesting point. I'll segue us over here, but I think it's an interesting point about the paper tiger argument, because all those tabletop exercises like the military decision making, like operational planning. I think that your units and mine have been using Iran and Russian equipment to plan against for training purposes for many years, and it's always a hard or impossible scenario. Right. To defeat that equipment. So we're learning out live that maybe the Kobayashi Maru is not necessary or not real, and it's actually all a paper tiger, which is super interesting.
But luckily, our recruiting is taking a turn. Sorry, hard segue.
I'm gonna out you. Yeah. We haven't talked about this on this podcast, or at least I don't think we have, and we haven't. And we've intentionally not talked about it because it's not typically relevant to the content of the show. But one of the stories from this week that was not as headlining news is Israel. But one of the stories from this week, I think, drives me to say that Garrett is still a lieutenant colonel in the United States Marine Corps Reserves, and I'm a lieutenant colonel in the Army National Guard. And neither of us has any ego about that being middle management in the part-time force. I only specify those ranks because that's the rank that the tech executives received as a direct commission into the Army Reserves. And you both need to strap in because I'm going to do a little bit of story time here. So I'm sure you both have passionate thoughts here. Just save them for a second. So I'm currently in command of an infantry battalion. For the uninitiated, the Army Reserve is like the support roles, and the Guard is the combat roles or the domestic operations roles. It's the soldiers with the shields and the guns. So my soldiers, just like our active duty counterparts in every combat unit, frustrated with the pace of military modernization. The world's small now; they can see all the rapid advancements in tactics and tech and modern conflicts, and they basically look at me and go, "What's your plan?" So I do things the right way. I engage my chain of command. I write requests. I write draft requirements. All of this, but the results are lackluster, despite a whole bunch of good uniformed people that I work with. So we start using hacks. We use other people's money, borrowing authority, exemptions to policy, all that, and it leads to a pretty extraordinary event in West Virginia last week. DEFCON scientists and some premier active duty units helping us out with topics like signature management and one-way attack UAS design and employment, and EW sensing and effects. So probably still laughable from frontline Ukrainian units, but pretty advanced topics for U.S. conventional forces, especially for the Guard. So I'm exhausted in unforgiving terrain in West Virginia. I'm tinkering with the parameters of our mesh network, attempting to decrease our detectable signature, while a SIGINT detection device hunts us, and we employ advanced robotic capabilities from a tactical cloud decision support tool. There's fiber all over the place. That's exactly when the story was published. So one of my NCOs walks up to me, shows me the article, and goes, "Great news, sir. The Army's going to commission Facebook executives as lieutenant colonels to tell you how to harness technology." And of course, my also Ranger qualified operations sergeant major behind me pipes up and goes, "Book him for Ranger school," which I think pretty well summarized how we all feel about this.
So maybe just to put some data behind this, 4 tech executives were commissioned as lieutenant colonels, O-5 rank in the Army Reserve. This is Sham Sankar, who's the CTO at Palantir, Andrew Bosworth, the CTO at Meta, Kevin Weil, who's the chief product officer at OpenAI, and Bob McGrew, who I think is former OpenAI, and maybe he's got some other startup going on over there. So I don't want to like drown this thing in personal anecdote, but Marines are jealous of the title. I don't want to get tribal things in here, but like Marines are really jealous of the title Marine, and it's not easy to become a Marine or a Marine officer. And so the thought that you would direct commission somebody with literally zero military qualifications to an advanced rank that for me, and I'm a Marine Reserve officer, I was prior enlisted, so a little bit of a different starting line for progression through the ranks, but I was just promoted to lieutenant colonel after 20 plus years of service in mixed active duty and reserve time. And like, I thought that I wasn't particularly deserving. And so anyway, match that up against these guys. And I wish them well. Here, another quick anecdote. My great grandfather was 41 or 42 years old when World War II had a big demand on the U.S. civilian population. And he went and received a Navy Reserve commission, I think, as a lieutenant commander O-4, because they were in need of, middle management type folks with advanced degrees and other stuff. And so anyhow, I have mixed feelings on this, but generally come down on the side of these guys could have contributed to the mission not in uniform. They were already doing that.
Yeah.
Why did they also need to be in uniform? And I come down hard on the idea that this is pure and simple virtue signaling. And we'll get into this in a few minutes, maybe near the tail end of the pod, but OpenAI was recently awarded a very large contract. I'm not going to draw conspiracy theory lines between these things, but like a couple of, OpenAI executives signing up as Marine or as military reserve officers, big giant conflict of interest looming, I think there. So anyway, those are my thoughts.
I only want to say two things. One, I think that the titles of soldier and Marine are very resilient. So like, I don't want to get all sky is falling that, a handful of what I think are, needlessly undeserving appointments somehow irrevocably damage our brand or our institutions. But I do think that it's more about the Army trying to signal than it is about anything else.
Yeah.
Call me when you start putting tech execs in enlisted positions.
Yeah.
Let me know when that happens. Let me know when they're filling sandbags, and then I'm like, okay, now we're trying to do something weird here.
Or at minimum putting on a rucksack and some boots,
Yeah. I don't think you're going to see any interesting outcomes from this. I think you're going to see a bunch of press releases. And I actually had an interesting conversation with a JAG yesterday that mentioned this, like, hey, how do you even interact with a lieutenant colonel who undoubtedly reports only to the chief of staff of the Army, and that's his only real touch point with the rest of the military? Like, you're not telling him what to do. You can't have a useful chain of command conversation. He works for the chief.
Salute the rank, not the man, probably at the end of the day. You're going to get a lot of passive aggressive behavior in and around this topic, I think. But you know what?
All in the Pentagon.
I honestly wish them well, right? Like
Sure.
I want to win. And if this is part of the solution to get people on side, and an element of this is recruiting numbers are down across all service, well, except for the Marine Corps. Sorry, we hit our numbers, I think, pretty consistently. But but the other services are suffering from a recruitment standpoint. And also there's been kind of like a wobbling of what does it mean to be an American patriot? And I think it's good that you have very talented, wealthy people who don't need to serve, in quotes, who go and put on the uniform. I think it's
I actually take the opposite perspective on that. I think that if you don't impose a sacrifice upon people for their service, then it doesn't count for anything. It does cheapen the idea of service in my mind.
I mean, it might not even meet the definitional requirements of the word service. Right? So, go ahead, Dave.
So it may just be marketing and virtue signaling, or likely is, but maybe that's okay.
Maybe. And I think we'll see. And I honestly, I wish them well. I hope that this is successful. Right. I really do. I just, I have a pretty harsh and critical opinion of it. Given the number of people who I think actually sacrificed and served, and this just doesn't match up in my mind. But I really do wish them well. I've met Sham. I think he's a great guy. And there's potential to do a lot of good here. So I hope all of that happens. Okay. So these guys are emerging out of, the venture-backed technology ecosystem. I want to cover maybe the deal book here, just big events in the venture capital industry as it touches on defense technology. So we had a couple of big, announcements of large venture financing rounds. I'll just touch on three. There were plenty more than that, but three of note. Mock Industries raised $100 million on something like a $470 million pre or post. I wasn't sure from the articles I looked at. It's unclear to me exactly what Mock does. They are in the unmanned system space, as many companies are nowadays, and it's a capital-intensive industry if you want to build sizable robotic platforms, and so that's happening. Anduril closed yet another gigantic multi-billion-dollar round, $2.5 billion on something like a $30+ billion post money. They continue to climb and continue to, I think, feel the pressure to live up to the hype that all the previous venture rounds have layered on top of them. But they're, the signal, rising unicorn success or success in waiting in our industry. And as I said in the previous segment, I wish them well. We need, trendsetters and bushwhackers ahead of companies like ours to ensure that innovation can happen, and they're putting on a lot of weight. All right, last one, and I think we've got a few more kind of personal touch points or perspectives on this. I won't draw them out unless Dave, you want to jump in on this one. But One Brief raised a $20 million what's billed as a Series C extension on something like a $1.1 billion post money valuation. It, levering them into this unicorn or $1 billion plus club of defense technology players. We've got 10 to 15 of these now. Not all of them are going to succeed. Many of them will fail. Some of that'll be healthy. Some of it won't be. Comments, thoughts on deal book topics.
I'm probably gonna hold off on commenting on One Brief. That's a little.
Dave and I in a standoff, like who's the first one to bow out?
That's a little close to the It's a little close to the pin. Probably in both professional capacities and relationships.
All good. You can read between the lines there with Dave's non-comment comment. The question mark remains: can you live up to gigantic revenue multiple valuations? Is the venture industry right for defense, or is the defense industry right for venture, or something like that question?
As the committed guy, I just want to reiterate that I don't understand how valuation works, and I don't see how one of these by itself, I would be like, oh, wow, that's interesting. They must be doing something extraordinary. There seems to be new news like this every 3 weeks. It feels like a big hype wave. It feels like a big, massive hype wave, because I keep seeing these valuations, but I don't keep seeing massive contract wins, new programs of record. That shift hasn't happened yet. I know the budget well enough to know that shift hasn't happened yet.
Yeah.
So this is a promise on future work, as far as I'm concerned.
Well, there's a reason why all these companies are privately held and not already in the public markets. The public markets evaluate on much harsher criteria, which are based on like material delivered reality, and the venture industry is in the business of betting on the future. And so
I'm a public market guy. I've always known that about myself. Big public market
but there's only so I think it's inarguable at this point that the venture industry is one of the key factors that has brought America into the top tier of technological prowess in the world, regardless what you think of those companies, the Mag 5, the Mag 7. That's just one of the ways that the innovation ecosystem and the technology, ecosystem here in the United States works, and it's what keeps us at the forefront of technological prowess. But I get how confused you or anybody might be about the valuations associated with these things.
So Garrett, instead of commenting, like, keep educating us here. So I think that One Brief has been around, as opposed to commenting on the the technology or where it's headed. One Brief's been around since, I think, like somewhere between 2019 and 2021. There was a Y Combinator in there, somewhere. So call it 5 or 6 years. How long do they have, right? If this is a VC back, like what's the indicator? This is a game of a decade, right? Is that it?
Yeah, well, so first I'll say that my comments about is defense right for venture or is venture right for defense, those comments stand because nobody quite knows whether the traditional venture capital model can be applied to the defense technology innovation wave that we're seeing right now. And Simon, I think, rightly called it a wave. I call it a renaissance, but that's what it is. So we don't know yet if defense venture investing is going to follow the same pattern as the venture investing that we saw kind of pick up in the 80s and 90s and drive us all through the internet and social media revolutions of the past couple of decades and cloud computing and all that stuff. So a typical venture fund runs on a 10-year cycle. In other words, venture funds typically need to return capital and the gains to their limited partner investors within a 10-year cycle, basically. The average life cycle of a traditional SaaS company, so this is software as a service, the stuff that we've seen emerge out of the innovation Silicon Valley bubble over the past 15, 20 years, that life cycle to return capital is typically 7 years. So it's a 7-year life cycle before you exit. And exit could be you get bought by another bigger company, or you go public and make your way into the Simon Kuhn approved public markets.
The biggest success story so far, and you correct me if I'm wrong here, is Palantir. Right?
Yeah,
but
arguably the only success story, and maybe SpaceX.
But didn't it take Palantir? I mean, Palantir was around in what, 2001, 2002, 3 maybe. Like that's almost 20 years.
Yeah, it was a 20-year. So this is what I mean when I say like nobody knows what the defense pattern is going to look like, and nobody knows if traditional VC is going to be right for defense long term, because VC needs to return capital relatively quickly. It's a high risk investing activity on the riskiest end of private equity of the private equity spectrum. So what does it look like in the future? Maybe it is more private equity style investing that's much more patient for the defense industry. So nobody really knows. I think everybody's kind of like understanding that there's going to be maybe 10-ish, 5 to 10 really successful multi-billion-dollar exits, but on what time horizon? And in the case of Palantir, if Palantir is the only example we have to point at, it's going to be a long time.
Yes.
Yeah. Founders, though, gain interim liquidity, and some of their investors gain interim liquidity or returns on sweat equity and investment by participating in what's called secondary transactions, off cycle from an M&A event or a public offering, as ways to gain some slivers of liquidity along the way. But yeah, we'll see. I think jury's out. A lot of what the venture-backed, defense tech ecosystem depends on emanates from the U.S. DoD, which is underpinned by the budget cycles that are decided on in the halls of Congress. So Simon, that's a mic handoff to you. What's
extremely functional congressional budget cycles?
Yes, yeah, very functional.
Well, I got bad news for everybody. It's getting worse. So last Thursday, the House Appropriations Committee advanced their defense bill for fiscal year 26. So this is our first real piece of movement in a fiscal year 26 budget. The bill that they approved was $831 billion. And that lines up with the top line requested by the Trump administration. However, we still don't have the actual budget submission request documents from the Trump administration. So we don't have details from the admin as to how they want to see that $831 billion spent. My guess is when that comes out, and from what I'm hearing, it's going to be next week. But my guess is when that comes out, it's going to look very different from what the House just passed. So we're going to have some different priorities. Keep in mind, the Biden admin request for fiscal year 25 was $850 billion. It was $20 billion more than what we're seeing requested and what we've seen approved in the House. So not only are we going to have these discrepancies, but it's less money. They call it nominally flat, right? You're in the wheelhouse, but it's not more spending power for DoD. And we've kind of beat this topic to death, but it's back in the news, which is that the position of the administration is that reconciliation will not only make up the difference, but push it all the way to $1 trillion budget. So there's $100 billion of defense spending that is tied to the reconciliation process. And the big news this week about the reconciliation process was that the Senate has released its text or early text for the tax provisions. Without belaboring all like the nitty gritty here, for the defense focused in the world, our payday is kind of strapped to the bigger national politics surrounding reconciliation, and things are not looking good. We're seeing a lot of Senate moderates, moderate Republicans, I should say, who have criticisms of the reconciliation bill for potential cuts to Medicaid, Medicare, and not slowing down the rollback of different tax credits that they want to see, protected for parochial reasons. And you have Senate hardline Republicans who think this adds too much to the deficit. Why does this matter? If the Republican Party cannot get on the same page, reconciliation cannot pass. It requires all the Republicans to get together, House and Senate, and agree on one big thing. The one thing that none of them seem to argue about is that there should be $100 billion for defense in the package. But if they can't agree on all the other things, then that $100 billion never materializes, and we're now looking at a $20 billion cut to the defense top line from fiscal year 25 going into fiscal year 26. This is a dramatic difference.
Quick layman question. I've asked you this on previous pods, so I'm sorry. I should know better than to forget the answer to your question and should just remember. But DHS and Homeland Security, that's not part of that $100 billion defense.
It's a separate pot, but it's a good highlighting piece for this dysfunction within Senate Republicans right now. So Senator Rand Paul is in charge of the Homeland Security and Government Affairs Committee. That committee is charged with writing the border or DHS provision of the reconciliation bill. When it passed the House, it was $150 billion for the border mission. Rand Paul's version of this text is only $75 billion. He cut it in half. The Republican Party disagreed so vehemently about this that Senator Graham has released his own version, essentially, they're saying Senator Graham is the chair of the Budget Committee, therefore he can overrule any of you. So he released a different set of text that looks a lot more like the House version, back up to $150 billion for the border. These are deep divides.
Lindsey Graham, typically seen as a very hawkish kind of pro-defense investing.
Hawkish on defense, hawkish on national security. Right. And I think for Rand Paul, what matters most is fiscal responsibility for the nation. Yeah. And that is the national security piece is not as big a part of this larger conversation. Like I said, they all kind of roundly agree there needs to be $100 billion for defense, somewhere between 75 and 150 billion for Homeland. I think 150 wins out. But the real meat and potatoes of the argument, I mean, this is like dust compared to the $3 trillion that the tax provisions are adding to the deficit, right? And that's the problem. You can only afford to lose a couple of votes in the Senate in order for the Republicans to be able to pass reconciliation. There will be no Democrat votes for any of this. That's not how reconciliation works. It always goes by party lines. It requires, like a lockstep party in the House and the Senate and the admin to get something like this through. And in the meantime, a tenth of the $1 trillion budget hangs in the balance while they sort this out.
In the Senate, J.D. Vance has the tiebreaker vote, and they could lose. The Republican Senate side of the Senate could lose, 2 or 3 votes?
2 or 3. I'd have to go back and check. I'm not good with numbers. I'm more of a vibes guy.
You're a vibes guy. Yeah, and we know that about you.
Yeah. Public markets, vibes, Dead and Company, you know me.
Harm's Way is more of a vibes band. What about in the House? What are we looking at from margins of votes?
Well, that's a hard question to ask, right? So for the first big House question is timing. They want to pass a reconciliation bill before the end of July. Right. The goal for the Senate was to pass their version by July 4th, so that the House has, however many weeks to reconcile whatever differences there may be.
Yep.
The more changes that the Senate makes, the longer it's going to take to make a reconcilable version between the House and the Senate. I can say from my read of the House is that the more you reduce the tax cuts, the harder time you're going to have, right? That is like the number one priority for the House is to cut taxes. But there's some folks in the Senate who are very, very concerned that, you cut taxes to the bone, you raise the deficit dramatically. And that's Rand Paul's big complaint. Ron Johnson has a similar position, but he's softened recently. I think it's really going to boil down to, can the president whip the Republican Party into something like a compromise position? And as of right now, I think it's probably on the shakiest footing it's been all year. Like it's very hard to chart a course forward right now.
Dave, I've got a question for you on this topic. I don't know if this is useful for you. It looks like you're on the verge of saying something, but I'm going to throw a question.
I've got a question for Simon first. If you want, So Simon, this reconciliation, and this is gonna sound really ignorant because it is. Like, this reconciliation stuff, like I didn't learn that in civics class, right? This is not the way that this is supposed to operate. Like this, it's no longer the exception. This is the rule. This is the fallback plan for a Congress that doesn't function. Am I understanding this correctly?
No, that's not really what it is. It's not a fallback at all. Reconciliation doesn't have to happen, even a little bit. Nothing in that bill needs to happen for our government to function. Everything will continue along as normal without reconciliation. Reconciliation, the way it currently is used, is a thing that when the parties, whether Dem or Republican, when they achieve a triumvirate, so they get the House, they get the Senate, and they get the presidency, they have a process called reconciliation with which they can pass sweeping legislation that is filibuster proof, right? So in order to pass anything in the Senate, you need 60 votes. Reconciliation is special. It has privilege. It is one of the only things that you can pass in the Senate without having to get to 60 votes. You can do it 50 right along party lines. It just has a very specific set of rules for how you craft the legislation. So it has to all affect revenues. It was a process that was designed to reduce government spending, pretty ironically. So the idea was originally it would be a lower threshold to pass, and you could adjust all of these different spending levels to fix the government's budget. And this is Senator Byrd. This is older Senate stuff when it was crafted. And that way you could ram it through. You could do a whole bunch of big cuts and just ram them through. That's not how it gets used. By and large, when one of the political parties finds itself in a position that it holds all three branches, or the two branches, I should say. I always think of the Senate and House separate branches. That's wrong. Anyway, when one of the parties holds two branches and they have that majority, they tend to use reconciliation as a way to push their biggest policy priorities. And you just find a way to write the language to push those priorities. You saw it with the first Trump admin. They did the big tax cuts. Reconciliation requires that anything you do expire at 10 years, which is why those tax cuts are expiring and they have to come back and do reconciliation again. You saw it with the Biden admin. They used reconciliation to do the Build Back Better bill. This has been back and forth basically since George W. Bush. George W. Bush was the first time you really saw reconciliation used as a cudgel to do big policy movements. And that seems to be just the path that we're on. But if reconciliation fails, nothing really happens. Tax cuts will expire. We'll go back to business as usual. And my concern has been from the beginning, and you've seen similar concerns from Senate appropriators, that if you carve off a piece of the defense budget and stick it under reconciliation, and God forbid something goes wrong with reconciliation, you just have a diminished defense budget. That's what you end up with. Now, that being said, if reconciliation dies before they finish the defense appropriations process, my guess is they change those top line numbers and they come back around.
That's
if they
fiscal year 26.
Yeah.
Yep.
But the flip side is if they finish fiscal year 26 first and then reconciliation dies, that's a way scale. Like you can't, I guess you could do emergency spending, but it puts you in a really bad position. So we're playing a dangerous game. We're definitely like running into a potential trolley problem here.
Dave, what are your counterparts on like the defense acquisition side, the planners, the KOs, the acquisition professionals? Are they counting on reconciliation money trickling down? Are they worried about flat top line going into 26? I know because everybody's kind of like revving up for the POM process that goes through the summer and into the fall, right? So like that's planning and all that stuff. What are they saying?
Yeah, so I think the sentiment that I've received is more like it's a surprise pop-up market of, nice to haves. If reconciliation is accomplished, if like there's no guarantees there, but there's, pet projects are nice to have for, stuff that's priority 3 to 5. That, the preparation is, they'll build pre-positioned sort of like program narratives, and have those projects sort of prepared if that pop-up market or that additional funding exists.
So real quick, this is going to be different in different places, but DHS in particular has been spending under the assumption that they're going to get reconciliation.
Yes.
So you're seeing reporting already this is true. DHS is going to run out of money. ICE is spending more money operationally than they ever have historically. If they don't get an infusion of cash in the next month, they're going to start to ICE. Yeah.
I haven't seen them in the news recently. What are they
Yeah,
doing?
exactly. Right. Nobody really knows what they do. It's very mysterious. But the reporting now is that ICE has been overspending its budget so dramatically that they could run out of money and need to start suspending operations next month. And that's because they've been operating under the assumption that the reconciliation money would hit to pay for this like very elevated tempo.
Yeah, I should have specified, like, this is the sentiment of, Department of Defense, and it's completely different in non-DoD agencies, right? The like Commerce, Department of Energy, HHS, like they are, they treat it completely differently. That's a good clarification, Simon.
Well, some of the question in this acquisition community, from the upstart side is like, are in this kind of flatline budget scenario, whether reconciliation happens or not, like, are we to expect escalated contract awards? Because that's, at the end of the day, like, those are the things that prove this venture-backed valuation wave or hype cycle, whatever Simon was referring to earlier. So, like, what are you observing, Dave, in the landscape, the contracting landscape, to either prove or disprove that that's possible?
Yeah, I don't know that the advice or the strategies really changed much on topics that we've hit before about, like, being able to predict what Capitol Hill is going to do, and are we going into a continuing resolution, or are they going to have additional budget? It's pretty much the same playbook, like align with strategic priorities. If you're like, make sure you have your contracting strategy plan in place. Make sure you're targeting the right technology readiness levels to the right places, and like if you need to shift from DoD to non-DoD federal agencies to hedge your bet a little bit, then do that.
Right. Well, one of the big items that we saw recently is a fairly sizable, hundreds of millions of dollars worth of contracting, apparently aimed at bringing this new age of AI and language models into the defense, ecosystem. So, I think I'm referencing the right article here. So go ahead.
OpenAI. So OpenAI announced a $200 million Pentagon contract. The company comes with obviously serious weight, name recognition, top investors, high level political connections, and it's a shiny object with political pressure in the sort of AI arms race.
Is that sorry to interrupt, but is that a $200 million like task order, or like an actual contract, or is this an IDIQ with contract ceiling? Is that
$200 million ceiling?
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, what I read was ceiling that they anticipate $200 million worth of work.
Sure. So do I.
As well. Yeah, as well as I do that the contract ceiling is not nearly as important as the actual tasks and funding that's obligated to that contract. In this case, with the echelon that it was awarded at inside the defense acquisitions apparatus, it seems likely that 100 million or 200 million.
Deploying software tasks is a much faster throughput of funding than it is to tasks to build hardware.
It ought to be if SecDef's like software acquisition pathway memo and the other kind of the EOs around. Yeah.
That's why I flagged this for discussion, because although all of those things are true, right? Shiny object, high level political connections, political pressure, like all of those things are true, but it still proves that this is possible. Sure. Because I can't think of a more challenging technology than OpenAI from a policy and compliance perspective. So we have obviously figured out how to do exceptions to policy, to rapidly award OpenAI a $200 million contract to flow work through. That means that we can figure it out elsewhere. So I actually think this is a really positive, overall, I think it's a really positive indicator. I think it's probably just the beginning, and it'll take a little while to filter out to the rest of the acquisitions community and ecosystem. But we use a word on this podcast a lot, which is risk or risk aversion. Somebody or a group of people in the US DoD was willing to accept some risk here, because this is a risky endeavor to award.
Well, it's not entirely clear to me what this is even intended to do. Like it's pretty like abstract. In other words, like the DoD, I think, recognizes they need to start the adoption cycle for things like language models and quote AI. They probably don't know exactly where to aim it, or maybe they do, but this seemed like a general purpose enough contract vehicle with a pretty general purpose set of language model tools that could be aimed at lots of different stuff. I mean, this could be aimed at improving clerical work within the administrative echelons at DoD. It could be all the way down to mission planning. At the one brief, we invoked that name earlier in the conversation. It could be that. I mean, it could be anything in between. So, like, do we even know where this is going to be aimed?
One of the articles that I read outlined, and I don't know whether they were confirmed or whether there were assumptions, so take it for what it's worth, but it included enhancing military decision making, AI, like adding AI power to autonomous systems, data processing and analysis, including for intelligence work, simulation, scenarios and training, human machine collaboration. Like I didn't get the impression that the intent of this thing, and they may start there with the first task, right, of like clerical data or clerical work, but I didn't get the impression that this is intended to like automate the process of doing evaluations for your soldiers, or updating their dental records. Like it seemed pretty clear that this is about making us more lethal.
I mean, the long tail of readiness tasks, though, that you just kind of referenced there, dental readiness, whatever. I mean, that actually is a pretty huge impediment to our ability to like force project, actually send people downrange or like put people into operational contexts, right? So like I think that's actually one of those like stealthy, high value, juicy targets for things like language models and AI deployment if you can get it right. And so it would not surprise me in the least to see them targeting those kinds of administrative or clerical workflows with these types of deployments. But the sexy, flashy stuff is always weapons platforms and all that stuff. So yeah.
I think that every joint like staff section in the building with 5 sides will probably come up with a good use to test and flow a task to OpenAI.
Yeah.
To build exclusively against it. That's what I expect, which is why I anticipate they'll probably use most of that $200 million ceiling.
Somebody might comment, in one of our feeds that I'm wrong here, but I think that this is the first example of DoD anyway, maybe government, contracting directly with one of the large foundational AI language model companies like an OpenAI. There are others out there, X, Grok, Anthropic, all those things. I think this is the first example of that, which I don't know if that ends up being like a clear first mover advantage or a first adoption advantage to a company like OpenAI. Seems like it would be. But it also hopefully means that there was some amount of like diligence and test and evaluation and all of that going into evaluating the options that are out there. Also, this, like, the government could always have adopted tools like this through one of their prime systems integrator type cutouts, right? So like an SAIC or a Booz Allen Hamilton or a Deloitte or whatever, implement language models into our workflow. So this might be the first example of a direct contracting action with a language model company or an AI company, but there's the possibility that this stuff is already being used at some level through one of those prime layers, right?
Absolutely. And we know that it has. I think the salient point for me is it is proof, or if it's executed well, will be proof that this system can adapt, and that we do have the willingness to accept technical and programmatic risk for getting after some of these technologies. And I hope that OpenAI is successful. I hope that they build great capability and capacity under this, and then I hope that most of the acquisitions community follows suit and like drives the exceptions to policy and gets capabilities like this on contract.
It also makes me wonder what the potential adversaries of the United States are doing in this regard. Like, I wonder if there's been a lot of rhetorical pressure in government to like move quick in innovation and adoption, because what if the Chinese do it first? What if the Russians do it first? What if whomever does it first? So I wonder to what extent this type of technology is being infused into the People's Liberation Army, technological stack and other stuff, and if that's inspiring an acceleration of this kind of adoption in the U.S. military. I got to imagine that whether real or imagined, that is a driver. And I just hope we don't, stumble out the gates getting this kind of tool set, in the hands of military professionals. Guys, I think I'm going to call it. Should we go around the horn for last words, alibis, whatever we want to call them? Simon, you got anything else to cap us off with?
I just wonder if you guys are scared about talking to the robots and let it answer your emails for you. It's not for me. I'm telling you that right now. Do all mine manual, old school. I'm the proud Luddite of the Goat Rodeo podcast. I don't trust it.
I have OpenAI tools running on my computer all day long.
Ooh,
right now.
Scary. They're listening to me
OpenAI.
talk. They know I'm on the other team.
I've been messing around with OpenAI, ChatGPT stuff, and Gemini from Google. I like Gemini a lot. The deep research thing, that tool set, I think is really handy. I actually would like to leverage some of these tools in a better way to help me triage communication stuff, email and other things. Because I don't know about your inbox, but I get like 1,000 unsolicited emails every day.
Yeah.
So anyway, a more intelligent inbox or an AI agent to help me sift through all that and triage it could be useful.
Agent is the exciting next step.
Totally.
I think there's a lot of potential to make all of our lives a lot easier if we're willing to engage with it. Just be nice to it, Simon, so it remembers you as one of the good humans.
There's Cronenberg just made a whole new movie about this. It's really scary. Not doing it.
Well, fellas, it's been an invigorating conversation. Lots going on in the geopolitical environment. I'm sure everything is going to be very different when we convene next week. But thanks for the chat. For everybody out there, thanks for tuning in, watching, listening. Please subscribe. Please leave commentary. We want to hear what you are thinking and contribute to our conversation here and make it your conversation. Follow us in the socials and on your podcast platform of choice. And we'll see you next week. Adios.